Amazing grace. God's grace truly is amazing. I have 4 stories to share with you about that amazing grace. Stories of brokenness, stories of pain, stories of struggle, and stories of people who overcame that struggle. A story is powerful. It has the ability to take place in our memory and stay there. Jesus used stories. They called them parables to illustrate a message that he wanted to get across. We're going to start with my story, and then we'll go into 3 other stories. All of them powerful, all of them unique, all of them a real person with a real story to share. As you see the pain and the suffering they've gone through, know that they've come through it, and so can you. When I was about 10 or 12, we moved into a trailer park. And I was still kind of a good kid. All of my friends and neighbors used drugs and drank and did a lot of things that I didn't think were right. But soon I started doing what they did. Right up here around the corner is my former drug dealer. From the time I was 12, if we could gather up the money, he'd run to the liquor store for a couple bucks and get us some liquor. Then he began to sell us marijuana and mescaline and cocaine and whatever else we wanted. Well, this is where I grew up. It was hard to find because everything's changed a little bit. We had a trailer that sat here. I found it by those trees my mother planted. I remember those out the back door. I didn't realize how small my little place we lived in was. I took care of a man who lived in here. He was a police officer who was shot and was paralyzed. I used to come over and vacuum his floor and make him some tea and make his dinner, and his wife was never home. And I used to steal money from him. I'd write checks out of his checkbook and steal his prescription drugs and get high on them. And he knew I was doing it, but he didn't care because I was the only one who came over. Spent a lot of years wishing to die when I was here. When I stand here, I think about the fact that our life was so crazy and chaotic, and my mother would scream and throw me around the house. And thinking about the neighbors, I remember saying, why isn't someone helping me? You're right next door, everyone can hear this, the whole neighborhood hears this going on. And it was just a sad little place to live. I had a mother. She was abused and neglected. Don't exactly know why, but it led to her being removed from her home and put into another family's home, and somebody in the household raped her. And as a result of that rape, I was born. She was removed from the home after she became pregnant, so she was on the street, living in the streets of Toledo. With that, she took her abuse and her anger out on me. She kind of modeled what she had learned with her family. So I grew up as early as I can remember knowing that I was the result of a rape. She began to tell me I was ugly, I was stupid, and said very cruel, very mean things. And quite often would just sit up in the living room all night long. I would hear her just screaming and crying. When I was about a year old, my mom married a man who later adopted me. She had a child with my adopted father, and when he came into the world, he was her everything, and she made it very clear that was her child. I was not. I was supposed to stay in my room. I wasn't allowed to play with him, touch him, look at him. She, continued to say, "You make me sick. I can't stand to look at you. Go away. Why don't you run away? Why don't you kill yourself?" And I felt pretty bad about it. I felt like it was my fault. My mom was hurting and was crying all the time. Soon my mother and father couldn't get along, and they divorced. I remember riding the bus and getting to the point where I would wake up with the shakes in the morning and would drink so I could go to school, and try not to drink too much, because if I drank too much, I'd have to leave school. Ultimately was kicked out for good. They wouldn't let me back. I was suspended forever. At that point, I was just going to party it away, and who cares, and my life's ruined, and there's nothing I'm ever going to be able to do about it. I began stealing, breaking into people's trailers and breaking into homes and doing what I could to find money to supply my drugs and alcohol. And then I met a girl, and she came from a home. Her mother had killed herself in the middle of their home, and so she was a pretty mixed up girl. Her dad was a drug addict who worked at Ford, and so he would send home $1,000 checks a week to pay the bills, pay for the car, pay for the food, and her and her little sisters lived in the home. So I moved in with her, and we played house for a while. I felt loved for the first time. I felt like there was somebody that was kind of as messed up as me and loved me anyway. I had a job working midnights, and I got off early one night and came home and found her with somebody else in the bed with her. So I just left and went out and just drank all day long, and came back later that night, kicked the door in, began to scream and yell and attack her, and her friend was over, and I attacked her friend. And the police came, and I proceeded to get violent with the police and grabbed a guy around the throat. They beat me up, and it was a really, really, really ugly night. And I went home that night to my mother. I had a really ugly episode with my stepdad, who my mom had married late in my teen years. I flipped the fridge, I threw TV sets, I broke windows, I went berserk, and it really was just, thinking back on it, it was me saying, does anybody see how broken I am? Does anybody see how much pain I'm in? Does anybody care? I saw she had a mental hospital's phone number, and she was going to have me admitted, and I didn't want to go to a mental hospital. I didn't want to go to jail. I had nowhere to go, so I decided I was going to take my life that night. And remember this peace that came over me, like, I'm not going to hurt anymore. I'm not going to have any more pain. Nobody can hurt me. No, I can't hurt anyone else. And I felt so relieved and so overjoyed that I had control, that I could end it, that, everyone would be better without me. My family would stop hurting. There was no one going to miss me. I had guns, but my mother had taken the ammunition. I left to go get the ammunition, and I went up my stairs and got to my door, and as I approached my door, there was a man walking up to my door. He was a pastor who was just going door to door, trying to build his church and his youth group. So as I ran into him, I really sat there going, is this God? Is this coincidence? Did this guy just show up out of nowhere? Who called him? Who told him to come here? And but something in me said, maybe, just maybe, God was saying, I'm here, and I know you're hurting, and I do care, and you're not alone. So I invited him in and took the chance to just kind of let him talk to me, and maybe he's got something I haven't heard before is kind of what I thought. I thought I have nothing to lose. If this goes bad, if this turns out to be a joke, if this is meaningless and fake, I reserved the right to go back to my other plan. He began to talk to me about God. I didn't know who God was. To me, if God was a man, I didn't know any good men to model after. And he began to open the Bible and talk to me about God and began to tell me that there's a God that loves me. And so we prayed together, and he spent the entire day helping me understand the significance of what had happened, and that I truly was, forgiven of all the horrible, terrible, bad things I had done. Some people in our church said, well, you can come clean stalls at our horse farm and we'll pay you some money. And one of the things that happened is I was there, a lot of quiet time to think about me and my life, and I was just piling the manure in the wheelbarrow or whatever, and I felt very strongly that God was saying to me, I needed to take some steps beyond the fact that he forgave me to make amends and make it right. An opportunity presented itself that very night. I went home, and a friend had been questioned over some crimes that I had committed. So I went to the state police and said, I'm here to turn myself in. Didn't want to do it, was very afraid of it, but felt so clearly that God said to do this, that it was the right thing to do, and that I had done wrong, and in man's eyes I needed to pay some consequence for that. They videotaped me and they audiotaped me and they took notes and they took me from home to home where I had stolen things. As I did, the charges continued to grow. I went through this whole process of faith and fear. God asked me to do this. He's not going to destroy me, but I might be going in a really crazy direction here soon. As the court date approached, I went in really anticipating prison time. The prosecutor's recommendation was that I would spend 12 years in prison. And I went into court and watched grown men with families that did far less than me go to jail. And so I pretty much decided in my heart, I'm going to start a prison ministry today. My attorney messed up everything, and everything he tried, he did wrong. He got scolded by the judge, and so it didn't look good, and the judge asked me to speak, and I said I turned myself in because I did wrong, and I deserve whatever punishment you bring. You're the judge. I trust your wisdom and direction. I do want to say that I am a new creation today. I am a new person. I've asked Christ into my heart. He's forgiven my sins. He's given me a new life. He's washed me white as snow, and I'm going to tell the world who he is and what he's done for me. And if you leave me on the streets, I can promise you I will be on the streets telling everyone I can find. And if you put me behind bars, I'm going to tell them how much God loves them and that their life can be different, even there. I remember it like it was the first time really telling a whole group of people, about my faith and being so scared. And the lady typing it, was almost like she stopped and looked at me, and I just felt like everyone was just staring at me, and the judge kind of rubbed his chin, and he says, no, I don't think you deserve to be to prison. He says, I'm going to go a different route. And he gave me 5 years probation, and he did convict me of one felony. I didn't understand the significance of that until later. I was released to go home and go to probation once a month. So I decided to get my GED and went back to college and graduated my associate's degree with a 3.9 and went on to Eastern Michigan University into accounting. As I neared the end of my college career, they told me you cannot become a CPA with a misdemeanor on your record. And in the meantime, I was doing invisible fence sales, and I was sitting in this little elderly lady's home and just felt a nudge to share with her what Jesus had done in my heart and how my life had been turned around. She invited me back to dinner. Her husband wasn't really happy that a salesman was there for dinner. And I told him, I said, I was sharing with your wife. I think that's why she invited me back. So I told him my story, and he began to have tears run down his face, and he was wiping them away and didn't really know the significance of what was going on. And he says, young man, he says, I'm a judge. He told me I can expunge your record. He was excited to help. He had a friend who was a Christian friend who offered me a great deal, price-wise, to get the legal paperwork done. I remember very specifically sitting at my kitchen table when these big envelopes that came in the mail. It was the state police and FBI files of my fingerprint records. it came back to me. It was given to me. It was taken out of the computer, and they says, your record has been wiped clean. And I literally just fell on my face and worshiped God. That was the beginning, and honestly, it was a short amount of time. I received a call from a firm, and they said, would you like to come work for us? So I went on board and began this journey as a CPA in this whole new world. It was kind of weird for me because everybody was quite a bit different, and I knew my past and my background and felt like a fish out of water a little bit. I remember moving up the ladder and moving along and getting my first real management position. So we went in this room. There was about 40 people in the room, and they began to share how they built their business through partying and going to the bars and taking clients to strip clubs. They asked me, and I said, well, I'm kind of thinking I'm going to build my business through some breakfasts and some lunches with some people who are Christian, and in the evenings I'm going to go home and be with my family. One guy in particular fell off his chair to make a scene, laughing at me and trying to humiliate me in front of everybody. Instantly my phone began to ring. Clients with 6-8 clients associated with them were coming through the door. At the end of the year, I stood in front of 400 plus people in front of my entire company and received an award for the most new business that year. The grand prize for that was a trip to my boss's $1 million condo on the ocean in the Turks and Caicos Islands. The senior pastor at the church I was attending came to me and offered me a position to work at the church. I said, well, this is a big step for me. God's got to lay it on my heart. So he didn't tell anyone at the church. Only him and I knew. In my heart, I knew it was what I wanted to do. This was a considerable step back in pay and in future pay. And it was a family decision that I really had to wrestle with. And one of the first things that happened is I called a friend who was my hunting buddy, who isn't a Christian and isn't a churchy. He's a man who says he doesn't believe in dreams. He's never really dreamt. And in the last 2 weeks, he's had 2 dreams that he was sitting in a church. And I was the pastor. So it was very clear to him and I that this was God truly trying to say something. And even with that, I was still a little hesitant and afraid. The next thing that happened was that I had a call from a man I had helped. And he called me and he says, Tim, I just want you to know I was at this men's conference all weekend long. And he said the clearest thing I'd ever heard in my life was that to call you and tell you if you get a call to ministry that you need to take it. I decided then, if I need to do this, this is God's will for my life. And so I came on board as the youth and family pastor. I remember sitting at my desk and going, okay, what's going to happen? And my phone rang, and it was somebody who had called and heard I was a drug addict who had turned my life around. And he said, I need to talk to someone. I'm hurting. I'm really bad. And I sat down and prayed with this man and led him to Christ and got him into a Christ-centered program, and he began to grow. And that was my first day, literally, in my office. And it's been an overwhelming, unbelievable journey ever since. My Mondays, I do a Celebrate Recovery program for drug addicts and sexually abused and physically abused and emotionally scarred. People that are just at that point of brokenness and no hope. And then on Wednesday nights, I have high schoolers and, again, a whole group of lost people, really trying to get answers and looking for hope and looking for direction. That was the age when I started to really fall apart and when God came and rescued me. So those are 2 areas I'm very passionate about and care very much about. And to know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, what I have to offer is the answer. To just have the ability to bring that as a career, if you can call it that, and it's overwhelming. I married the most amazing, beautiful woman I've ever known, and that's my wife, Gina. And I have an 8-year-old son, Devin. I have a 6-year-old daughter, Livia, and I have a 4-year-old, Caden. Our house is full of joy and peace. They're the joy of my life. It's amazing. I never thought I could be a parent. I never thought I could have a happy home. My mother and I have restored our relationship. My mother has since come to the Lord. She is the most amazing grandmother you could ever ask for. The point that we really reconciled was a point when I had to forgive. We can talk today openly about the fact that there was abuse and there were things that were wrong, and we can laugh. We're okay with the past being the past, and we both healed and moved on. It's kind of awesome, but our whole family's been blessed and restored and really living a great, wonderful, productive, healthy life together. So it's been 6 years since this video's been released, and we had no idea the impact it would make. This video has found its way all over the world. A pastor in South Korea has translated it to the South Korean language, and they show it and share it all over with people who need hope and need to hear a story of a changed life. We have a woman in New Zealand who contacted us through Facebook and began to ask questions about my life, and I had no idea why she was calling or what her purpose was until the end, when she told me that she was carrying a child that had been conceived in rape, and she didn't know what to do with that child. And because of our interaction and hearing my story, she decided that her child had a reason to live. I hope to meet that child someday. The next story you're going to hear is of my dear friend Lisa. She has a story of her own to share with you. It is powerful. It is a clear illustration of God's love and His grace for us.
I was born in Golden, Colorado. It was an accident. My mom and dad did not plan to have me. My father at the time was paralyzed from the neck down, and my mom had 3 growing boys. In the 60s, abortion wasn't readily available at the time, but a lot of women would try household remedies. She tried those twice. As you can see, it didn't work. Obviously, somebody else had different plans in mind. I was abused from the time I was 4. I don't know how to say it other than she didn't want me, and she made that very well known. Around the time I was 8 years old, my grandparents from California started visiting. My grandfather, my dad's stepfather, decided that he liked younger girls. And he began sexually abusing me. And it didn't matter how hard I tried to hide. He always managed to find me alone. And that continued until I was 16. I tried to tell my mom once, and she told me that she would take care of it. But it continued for another 4 years. My head was a complete mess. And I had gotten into a fight with my mother. She told me I would never amount to anything and that I wasn't good enough. I found the handgun that she had hidden in the bedroom. I loaded it, walked out into the garage, and said, "This is enough. I'm not gonna be a loser. If I can pull this trigger, I win." But I couldn't do it. I tried 3 other times that week. And at that point in time, I said, you know what? I might as well prove them right. My dad, being paralyzed, the nerves were not damaged when he was in his car accident. So he still had full feeling. That meant that he was on several pain medications. So I thought, you know, I'm in pain. Why not give it a try? I started just taking, one or two here or there. I developed a new group of friends. They introduced me to marijuana, alcohol, acid, LSD. Pretty soon those weren't enough. So I graduated to crystal meth, cocaine, heroin. I never used a needle with heroin. I smoked it. It had the same effect. To support my habit, I was an absolutely incredible thief. This continued for probably 3 years. During that time frame, my mom and dad divorced, and my mom remarried. She chose to move me to North Carolina with her new husband, who was also abusive. And I was there maybe a year when we got into a fight. He broke my nose and separated my shoulder. If I stayed there, one of us would kill the other. So I started calling my grandmother, my mom's mom, to see if I could come live with her. She did her best to nurse me back to health. The physical part of that was easy, but she wanted more for me. She wanted to introduce me to God. I wasn't interested, but she wouldn't stop. Up to this point, I didn't know who he was. I didn't know, that there was anything else out there. And if there was, how could he let me go through that? When my father died a month before my 18th birthday, she knew at that point in time that I was in trouble. My drug usage was out of control. I had no interest in going to college, no money if I wanted to. She knew that she had to do something drastic. And she said, you have two options. You can join the military, or you can go to church with me. I decided to join the Air Force. I was so angry that, that she made me make this choice, that I was bound and determined I wasn't going to fail. The military's pretty simple, no drugs. So I went through withdrawals, through basic training. I had a drill instructor that knew what I was going through, and she walked me through it. That was probably the worst 6 weeks of my life. Germany was my first station, and there all forms of religion are available. And I discovered witchcraft and Druidism, and it absolutely fascinated me. And everything made sense. Everything revolves around nature, there is no God. This had to be what I was meant for. While I was in Germany, I met the absolute love of my life. In my eyes, he only had one flaw. He believed in God. I thought, as much as I care for him, I can overlook that. He started out as my card-playing partner, became my best friend, and on January 29th, 1991, he gave me the pleasure of becoming my husband. We got sent back to the United States in 1992. My grandmother, she couldn't call when we were overseas because it was too expensive. But now that I was closer, she could call long distance. And God was always the topic. So I thought, okay, all right, Grandma, I'll give it a try. I went from church to church, Catholic, Protestant, didn't matter. It didn't make sense. And then a few years later, in 1996, I got a call from my mom. My grandmother had a heart attack after back surgery, and she didn't survive. At that point in time, I knew that I couldn't give her the one thing she wanted. She wanted me to know and understand God, but I couldn't give it to her because I didn't understand. So I began to think, maybe my mom's right. Maybe I am a loser. A few years later, my husband and I moved back to Colorado. And my Aunt Peggy was sitting there one night, and it was a Saturday night. She said, why don't you go to church with us? I didn't want to go, but, why not? And this man, Peter Hyatt, he stepped up to the microphone, and he was talking about our inability to buy God's love. I can't even really explain it. It just hit me. God is real. He does exist. This is where I belong. I finally found a place that makes sense. After my husband's grandfather passed away, he decided he wanted to move home. You know, we had spent 10 years with my family and it was his turn. So in 2007, we came to Brighton. Now Bob's family goes to the Brighton Nazarene Church. So I thought, okay. Pastor Ben Walls steps up. He's got a completely different preaching style than Peter Hyatt, but he made sense and he was honest. I didn't realize that I was still broken inside, you know, that there was still something missing. Then a year later, Pastor Ben gets up there and he made a statement that literally turned my world upside down. He said, "What is God whispering to you?" I had no clue what that meant, but it stuck in my head. And a few weeks later, Pastor Tim and Deb Winters stand up before service and they start talking about a mission trip. They need chaperones and kids. I can't even tell you what Pastor Ben preached that day, because in the back of my head, all I could hear was, "You're going to go, right? Sign up. You know you want to do this. Give in just one time." So I thought, okay, I'll give it a shot. I can always change my mind. And then I get a call, do I still want to go? The yes came out before I even knew what was happening. We're driving down there and, you know, the kids are talking and they're telling their stories, and, you know, the other chaperones talking about their stories, their walks with God and their talks with God, and I'm just sitting here going, oh no, I am in way over my head. You know, God's whispered to me once. I'm just going to hold him back. I'm going to stand on the sidelines and just, you know, stand in the back. Needless to say, God had other plans. He pushed me in ways that I've never been pushed. You know, Pastor Tim had a very simple rule. The kids don't do anything that a chaperone won't. So if I was going to expect them to knock on a door, I had to knock on a door myself. If I wanted them to talk to somebody who was dying, then I had to do it. Before I knew it, I'm talking to people about God. I'm not ashamed of it. And then the last day, you know, I was sitting at the table waiting. There was this loud voice in the back of my head. I've never heard anything like it before. And all he said was, "This is what you're missing." And I mean, you could see it. It was just, this veil just dropped in front of me. And I could see all these kids that I had gotten to know and love over the last week. They were hugging and they were talking about God. But once again, I was on the sidelines. God asked me, he said, "Do you want to be a part of this?" I said, "Absolutely." You know, well, what do I have to do? So you have to give me something. Okay, what? Everything. How do I do that? Well, as it turns out, Deb had gotten some information from some people there on the steps to forgiveness. You know, I'm sitting there looking at these lists of, you know, things that you have to forgive, and how can I expect God to forgive me for all of this? I haven't lived the best life. Not only that, but how am I supposed to forgive all these people that have done all of these things to me? Then up steps Deb. I absolutely love her. She talked with me. She prayed with me. She literally walked me through this. But more than anything, she never let me give up. She never let me give in. Before I knew it, I was able to let all of it go. I knew that I could let it go, that I can be forgiven. That was probably the most amazing day of my life, followed very closely by being baptized by Pastor Tim on October 8th. That's the one day that I can say, you know, My name might be Lisa Christine Pelcher, but I am a child of God, and I belong to Him. And I'm ready to tell the world that.
Now you have met my friend Lisa, and you know what makes her so special. You know why she has the passion and the heart that she has. She is a servant like no other. She gives of herself like nobody I've ever known in my life. And early on, when she would show up every day and do so much work for us in our ministry, I would say, Lisa, I don't have a budget. I can't pay you. I feel guilty that you're giving so much. You give more than some of our employees give. And she just looked at me with a tear in her eye and she says, Pastor Tim, as long as I keep hearing these stories, I want to be here and I don't want to be anywhere else. Her payment, her reason for giving so much was to hear the stories, to hear what God was doing, to be a part of that. And it reminded me the power of a story and how much impact it has to share those stories with the world. The next story you're going to hear is of my friend Don. I met him 15 or 16 years ago and soon found out he had an incredible story, an incredible life he had lived.
I started out growing up in Detroit, and by the age of about 5, my family moved to Livonia, and we're pretty much a middle-class family. My father was an accountant at the time, and my mother a typical housewife. As I grew up, there was a lot of tension in the home. My mother and father seemed like they did a lot of fighting. I can remember my older brother and older sister, the three of us, before the others were born, being in a corner of a bedroom just crying together because mom and dad were out fighting in the other room. Later found out my father was an alcoholic, and that was a lot of the reason I think that there was a lot of tension. I can remember my father getting in many accidents. I can remember a camping trip getting canceled because he hit a tree. I was really looking forward to a nice fishing trip, and I can remember being pretty upset about that. I can remember him being without cars and without his license. He was having an affair with another woman. It wasn't too long after that that I found out that my mom and dad were getting a divorce. I was just a kid growing up, and a lot of it I wasn't really paying much attention to until the day my mother had her stuff packed up and drove away. She moved back to Detroit where her mother lived, my grandmother. My oldest sister was basically put in charge of taking care of us. There was a heavy load put on her because my dad, he'd hardly ever be there. He was either at work, at his girlfriend's house, he'd come home in the morning, clean up, and go back to work. We basically fended for ourselves. I learned how to wash clothes at an early age in junior high school. When I think about it, 7th grade or so is pretty early to be in charge of getting your own laundry so that you can have something to wear to school. My mother was in and out of mental hospitals. I can remember visiting one time at Grandma's, and it was a dark, dungy room. She had a real low light on, sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee and smoking the cigarettes and really just staring into space. By the time I got into junior high school, I discovered alcohol. The first time I got drunk, we were drinking beer through straws and running from one end of the basement to the other against a paneled wall and crashing into it and dropping. I was a very quiet, reserved type of young boy. But I found that this alcohol could help me talk to girls, talk to other people. I was happy when I drank. I was always into sports. I was in Little League football, basketball, baseball. I was a springboard diver in high school. When I was early high school, maybe 10th grade, I can remember getting a phone call, and it was my grandmother. She actually told me that my mother had left the home and left a letter. The letter basically told my grandmother that she didn't want to be alone anymore. In essence, She was reading me my mother's suicide letter. I didn't know quite what to do, I was scared. I found out later that my mother was found in a lavatory in Edward Hines Park. She had overdosed from drugs. At that age, it's a really hard thing to go through. In some ways, I'm basically blaming myself. Maybe there's something I could have done to keep her alive. I think there's an early part of my codependency. I really struggle with trying to please people. I tried going to community college, and I think I got a total of 11 credits a whole year. So at the age of 19, a couple buddies convinced me to go into the Navy with them. In the meantime, my father had married the woman he had an affair with, and things between all of us wasn't very good. The best thing for me was to get out of the house and follow my friends. Unfortunately, overseas, there's drugs over there just like there is here, and 2 times I got busted with marijuana while I was in the Navy. When I was 22 years old, right after I got out of the service, my father died of cancer. He woke up one morning with pains in his stomach. It was a matter of 3 months and he was gone. I wanted to go to school, try to better myself. By then I was married. I had 2 girls. I had a hard time staying awake in the evenings trying to study after a full day of work. Went to a party at one point and was introduced to cocaine. I found that the cocaine was a very good way of staying awake while I was studying. Eventually I got my degree, but at the same time, my drinking, my pot using, cocaine habit grew. I was doing things in my life that I thought I never would do. Some buddies of mine, we went out doing some cocaine at the bar, and there was a woman in the bar that just somehow ended up sitting next to us. And at the end of that evening, she ended up needing a ride home, and I volunteered to take her home, not thinking about anything. She made a sexual advance towards me, and I didn't resist it. I didn't expect it, but I didn't resist it. I had an adulterous affair with this woman. Eventually, because of that affair, I left a 6-month-old girl and a 3-year-old girl and my wife. I often said I wasn't going to be like my dad, and as it turned out, I became just like him. That woman was a severe alcoholic to the point I couldn't even imagine. I became very stressed out. At the same time, dealing more coke, buying more quantities, bigger quantities. I eventually hit her and I abused her physically. My anger would turn to rage, and it would be uncontrollable. Thank God I never injured her seriously, but there was a lot of abuse that went on. I had an episode with my girlfriend. She ended up leaving the home, and the next thing I knew, there was about 3 police officers barging into my bedroom with guns drawn, pointing them at me. They arrested me for felonious assault with intent to do great bodily harm, less than murder. She had also told them I was dealing cocaine. They were able to get a search warrant, come into my home. Here I am now in jail. As it turns out, that was one of the best things that ever happened to me in my life. When I was in the jail cell, there's a library cart that goes by, and I grabbed this book, and the name of it was They Called Me the Catch Me Killer. As I read this book, I found out that this guy was a special forces agent in Vietnam, came home, became a police officer, ended up killing one woman and almost another. He'd kind of taunt the police, catch me if you can. Well, eventually they caught him. They put him in prison, and the story tells his life through prison. And this man gave his heart to Jesus Christ. I saw a true miracle of this man, his whole story. And after reading that book, I talked to the Lord. And when I was in the jail cell, I asked Jesus, I said, if you can do that with this man's life, I can't imagine what you can do with mine. And I asked Jesus into my heart. And within a couple of days, I was a free man out of jail. I was released on bond, awaiting trial and sentencing for the cocaine charges. As a result of the court, I wasn't supposed to see my girlfriend. And eventually one day my girlfriend called me and wanted me to come and see her. It was the hardest thing for me to do, to stay away from this woman. I basically beckoned her call. So one time when my girlfriend called me over to this motel, it had snowed that day and I saw footprints coming out the door. It looked like a man's footprints. So I got kind of suspicious of what was going on, and so I just went back to my apartment, and that evening there was a knock on my door, and I opened the door and it was the police. My girlfriend must have reported that I had contact with her, which violated my release conditions. And they immediately arrested me and took me across the street. I lived right across the street from the county jail. That time a chaplain had come through and I requested a Bible from him. So I started studying through that. And for 2 months in that jail cell, I started reading books. I started studying the Word of God. And then I was sentenced. I brought a scripture with me and I had it sitting in front of me, and it says, "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind." Because I was very, very scared. Of course, I mentioned the word God as I testified to the judge, and I felt that my God was with me and that He would help me through this. And He kind of mocked God, I remember, and sentenced me to 1.5 years in prison. I was pretty scared because there you're in the entire population, whether it be serious criminals or people that are in prison for alcohol, for drunk driving. I was one of the fortunate ones, and I got put onto a work crew that was right there in Jackson. I went through a couple incidents where I felt like my life was in danger. I was punched in the face one time for just talking on the phone. I turned around and I told him, "God bless you, God save your soul." And he turned right around and walked away. And the next day, one of the guys that was in his room with him was on my work crew, and he said, "I don't know what you did to that man, Don, but he grabbed a Bible and he's studying it." And it wasn't more than a couple of days after that, the man came to me and asked me if I could show him what part of the Bible should I study and how should I study it. Something changed him as a result of that incident. So, getting punched in the face can be a blessing. I went through prison 1.5 years and went back into life. Started going to AA, I was going to NA. I got a job and had to start almost all over again. And I've worked my way back up into a supervisory position. I found a church called Brighton Nazarene Church. With Celebrate Recovery, I'm a table leader, and I work with other people trying to just hear their story and give them encouragement. This is the least I can do, is to help others. In my heart, I can feel and I know what others go through. One of the things I always share with people is the hope that I have today. When I think of Jesus Christ in my life and what He's done for me, the big word for me is hope. Right now, my life's doing pretty good as a result of the changes I've made in my life. And I don't know how it can get any better. I found the Lord found me a wonderful wife. Her name is Linda, and she had 3 boys and I had the 2 girls. I look at today and I think of the many blessings and how things really are, and the whole scope of things, and how me being sentenced to 1.5 years of prison really saved my life and changed my life. Because I was in that jail cell, I picked up that book. I might never have ever picked up a book like that. And I never thought I could enjoy life the way I enjoy it. Before I had to have a drink to enjoy it. I had to have a line of Coke, I had to have smoke a joint. And today I enjoy life in a whole new way. And it's all because of Jesus. Oftentimes I ask, why do I deserve this, after everything that I've done in my life? That's really my story.
Now you know the Don that I know.
you know the life he's lived and what he's overcome to be the man he is today. He's one of the greatest facilitators we have at our Celebrate Recovery Ministry. He also is heavily involved in the Alcoholics for Christ ministry. But Don is using his story to give back and to help others change their life. Don has taught Sunday school for as long as I've known him. He sat with little children just with a goal of changing their lives and giving them hope and giving them a foundation so they don't take the same road he's taken. The next story we're going to see is of Crystal. Crystal is a friend of mine, but she's also my pastor's daughter. And even pastors' daughters have a story to share.
I learned really quickly how to become a Christian, how to walk like a Christian, how to talk like a Christian, how to carry my Bible like a Christian, how to quiz like a Christian. I mean, I was an awesome Christian, but I was about this deep.
I grew up in Michigan, and my dad was a pastor. I think I learned really quickly how I was supposed to act. My brother is 4 years younger than me. He was always the good boy, and I felt like sort of the black sheep of the family. Everything he did just seemed to be perfect and effortless, and I always felt like I was just making mistakes and disappointing my parents. I know that's not the reality of the situation, and that's not how it was, but that's definitely how it felt. I was really close with my dad and my mom both, but my dad in particular, I saw him as this bigger than life, amazing man that also put a lot of pressure on me because I felt like any mistake I made would disappoint him. I had actually become really good at lying from first grade really all the way through my first year in college. I started going to therapy when I was in second grade. The therapist is trying to get the truth out of me, and I was there because I was a pathological liar. So I went through 9 different therapists in a matter of 10 years. As I got into high school, I really started to lose sense of what was really who I was and what was really the act that I was portraying to everyone else. At school, I was one person. At church, I was very much that perfect Christian girl. At home, I think I was just a mess. I graduated under this view of this perfect person. As I went into college, I went to Western Michigan University. I thought very much that I could sustain that I could continue to be that person that I was.
Within my first year, my first freshman year, I mean, I had become like a Tuesday through Sunday alcoholic. I was drinking all the time, and I was going to a state school, so it was really easy to do that. And just through that, I had done some things that I was sure God could never forgive me of. I had done some things with boys that I couldn't take back, and I just felt worthless. I felt like everything that I had learned all the way up to that point in my life, I had just thrown out the window. I had turned from God and chosen to walk away. And I didn't know how to get back, to be honest.
Afraid she's gone too far away, too far.
I was dirty now, and I was sorry. I was used goods, and I had done this to myself, and I just hated myself for it. And it would cause me just to go into this spiral of depression and pain. As I left my first year of college, I definitely couldn't go back to my parents' house. I felt like, they would immediately know all the things that I had done. So I got a little apartment, and that summer, it just kept getting worse. I would sit there by myself at night and have no one to talk to, and I just felt so alone and so isolated, and I had pushed away everyone who had loved me, all of my friends, all of my family. I had broken up with some boy and just thought, well, that's it. I'm done. Like, I'm tired of being hurt by people. I'm tired of hurting other people. I got a bunch of pills and a bottle of alcohol, and I decided to call the ex-boyfriend that I just broke up with and tell him that I was sorry that I hurt him and I was sorry that I'd caused all this issue. I was sorry for what I had become. When I hung up the phone from him, I took the pills and I swallowed down a whole fifth of vodka, and I just kind of curled up.
And I just laid there in my apartment by myself, and I waited to die. And I just begged to die. I wanted it to be over.
He had heard the pain in my voice and knew that I was in trouble. He called 911. The first fireman to come through my door was a guy that went to my dad's church. And the first feeling I felt was just shame again, like, how could this be happening? Of all times, in my deepest, darkest hole, in comes this person that is just gonna judge me and hate me and tell my dad and tell everyone else, And he came over and he just grabbed me in his arms and told me that it was gonna be okay and that, he loved me and he was praying for me. And he got me into the ambulance, and when we got to the hospital, I begged him, please don't call my dad, please don't call my dad. And he promised he wouldn't, but he said he needed to call someone. So he called another guy from my church that was kind of my youth pastor, and so he came down to the hospital, and he came in, and he just started talking to me about forgiveness and about God. And at first I didn't want to hear it, and I didn't really want him to be there. But the more he talked, the more I just felt like there was no reason not to at least try to ask God for forgiveness. I mean, the worst that could happen is he would just say, no, you're too far gone. He prayed with me, and I asked God to forgive me kind of half-heartedly, honestly, because I didn't think it was possible, but I was doing it more because he asked me to. And when he left, I kind of said another prayer more from my heart and just said, God, if all the things that I learned growing up as a kid are true, and you're really there and you really love me, I need you. I have nothing left. I've tried so many different things to make people love me and to be who I think I'm supposed to be, and it's just not good enough, and I don't know what else to do. I slowly began the process with God of trying to figure out what this new life was about. I wish I could say that, that night in that hospital bed, I felt this overwhelming forgiveness and grace, and everything was pretty, and it just worked out great, but it didn't. I mean, it took a long time and a lot of hard work of daily trying to understand who I was in Christ. I really began to see how God wanted to have a relationship with me, and it was not about how many scriptures you memorize or how many Bible stories you know or how many people you witness to. It was about how much of my heart I gave to God. He really began to clean up my life and show me a path that I never thought I could have. During that time, I met a man who worked in Nashville on a Christian television show, sort of a MTV for Christians. It's called Fish TV. He asked if I'd be interested in having a job there as a video jockey. So I moved to Nashville. I traveled with bands, and I learned a lot about the music industry and about Christian music. While I was in Nashville, I began talking with a friend that I had back in Michigan. He was not a Christian, and we would talk for hours and hours on the phone at night about God and about what God was doing in my life. Slowly, I began to fall in love with him. One night, he accepted Christ over the phone. That was a really cool thing for me, because this was the first real experience that I had of leading someone to Christ. I mean, before I had done it, but it was more, I was racking up numbers of how many people I could save. And this person was someone that I really cared about, and I desperately wanted to find Christ because I cared for him. Several months passed and he moved down to Nashville. He asked me to marry him. Of course, I said yes. We decided to move back to Michigan. Both of our families are here. So we moved back and we got married and started going to my dad's church. I really felt like that was where we needed to be. I felt like that's where God was leading us. I became a worship leader at the church, and I felt like I had a good life and I was excited, in what God was doing, but I felt like there was still something out there that I couldn't quite see, but I knew he had prepared me for. I was talking with a guitar player that's on the worship team with me, and he was in a Christian band. They were looking for a new singer. And he said, well, why don't you just come out and audition and we'll see where it goes. There was several different auditions that I went through, and they chose me to be the new lead singer. The first concert we did, Jason asked me to share a little bit of my story. As we got into the concert and we got to the spot where I was supposed to talk, I opened my mouth to speak, and my whole life story just started flowing out of me, and I was not planning to share all of that information, but I started talking about the depression and the attempted suicide and the things that I had felt growing up, and I shared the hope that I felt now and how I saw that God could restore that brokenness. Afterwards, a mother came up to me. She was in tears, sharing with me about her daughter. Her story was almost identical to what I had shared. I wrote a song called Hold On, and it was really for her. I mean, it was sort of for me, the me that was going through that at the time. It just talks about the fact that there was a hope, that the end didn't need to be suicide. It didn't need to end that way. And that if she could just hold on for a little bit longer, she could see God is just waiting for that one moment where you can release that cry for help. And it doesn't have to be even physical words, but just in your spirit to just say, God, I need you. I don't want to be where I'm at. Then that's the first step. One of the first few shows that I did with Messenger, I had a flood of 12 different teenage girls come to me in tears. They were just so moved to see that I had been where they were. And as I went home that night, I just felt overwhelmed with the blessing that God could bring me to a spot in my life where not only could I feel whole, but I could help someone else feel that. And that all the things that I had been through and all the pain and the heartache and the brokenness that I had gone through could help someone else in their life. That was just more than I could have ever asked for. My life now is not at all what I would have pictured. I'm married. We have 2 beautiful children. As much as I went through and as much as I felt so far away from God, to now look back and see God's hand in all of that, His love in that, is just so awesome. When I share my story and I'm able to share the hope of Jesus Christ. And so I kind of found my place.
Just hold on. Don't give in.
Now you've got to know Crystal and the story behind the story. A pastor's daughter story, if you will. Crystal's life is continuing to transform right before our eyes. She has several times sat at a table, Celebrate Recovery Ministry, and allowed God to work through that ministry to bring the layers away from her life and to transform her into a new person day by day. Crystal and her husband now have gone on to take a church of their own. She went from pastor's daughter to pastor's wife. And that just shows you what God can do with a life. From the brokenness she carried so long to a life that is now giving and serving and being a contribution, making a difference in this world. So 6 or 7 years ago, I sat in this very chair and answered some questions about my life for a video that I assumed was going to be shown in a community college classroom. And really, the video itself transformed my life. in that it took my story and kind of took it out of the shadows and thrust it into the world, into a lot of places I didn't expect to be. I have been in front of the state senate and suicide and right to life groups, and groups all over the place have asked me to come and speak and share my story because of that video. And prior to that, I wouldn't have shared it with, I don't know, my next door neighbor. I was very scared and timid and struggled to be that real. The video has reminded me over and over again, as I've been asked to share, really how amazing it is that God has changed my life. And it forced me to be honest. It forced me to be vulnerable. It forced me to allow people into places that you don't normally do that. And it's scary and frightening and even painful at times. What it's done for other people and the hope it's brought and the lives it's changed, I am so grateful. I can't imagine my life without it at this point. I wanted to share some more of my story and the continuation of what God's done. What I'm excited to say is that my mother and I have continued to develop our relationship, and our relationship has flourished and grown. I'm grateful every time I hear that story, my own story, that my mother gave me life when many moms wouldn't have, and she chose to allow me to live this life that I'm living now, and I owe her everything for that. An amazing moment for my life was the day I was privileged to baptize my mother as a pastor, but also as her son, and to celebrate what God has done in our lives together in that way. Something happened that I couldn't have ever dreamed of. And it was that I was introduced to my biological father and his family. He was in a hospital bed with a brain hemorrhage and was facing the end of his life. I realized when I met him that there was a longing, and I did have a lot of pain and mixed emotions, that that was the father I didn't have, and that was the man I wished I'd had. I sat at his bed and shared my story, and I had the privilege of encouraging him to take God's hand as he left this life. And as I left, the wife came down the hallway and got a hold of me, and she asked me if I would be willing to perform a funeral service for him. And a few days later, they had taken him off life support, and he had passed. And I had the most amazing privilege of my life to stand beside somebody that I once hated, somebody I once blamed and was very angry and bitter. But to stand there and share that day with them, and to be given the opportunity to be a son for a day like that, and was just a privilege I couldn't have. I just couldn't have dreamed. I couldn't have dreamed that I would be able to do something so powerful, and that God would give me such an amazing moment. So my mother joined me at church one day, and we had a guest speaker, and the first words out of the mouth of this guest speaker were, "On March 24th, 1968, the Brighton Church of the Nazarene was born." And my mother turned to me, and I turned to her, and we both started sobbing. And I'm sure we look crazy to the preacher guy, but that's my birthday. We realized that was the day that she was birthing me in a hospital alone and afraid and crying out to a God she didn't even believe in at the time. But to realize that I minister at a church that shares the same birthday as mine, and just knowing that there's no accident, there's no doubt in our minds that God brought her to church that day so we could hear that side by side, to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God had a plan and a purpose for my life. I am excited to find out what the next chapter of my life will be. I know this. I know that God has used my story in ways I couldn't have imagined, and He's changing me. Every time I hear my own story, I'm reminded that there's a story still happening and unfolding. The greatest part of my life now is the ability to share it with others and to give to others and bring hope to others. I am grateful and blessed to sit here and to know that everything I've lived through was for a purpose and was for a reason. And the story is not mine. It is really a bigger story. It's a story about a God who loves us and came to redeem us and restore us and give us a hope and a future. And when I tell my story, I'm really telling His story. As we finish today, I want to ask you a question. What is your story? Is your story like ours? Maybe it's much cleaner, much prettier. I hope that it is. But I know that every one of us have lived through pain and disappointment, and we carry with us a lot of baggage. It's up to you how the rest of that story will end. I pray that you would step out of any pain, any suffering, any struggle that you carry, and that you would go seek freedom. I pray that you would find a church, a good Bible-believing church that you can call family. That you would find a group, a good support group such as Celebrate Recovery, where you can be healed, you can be honest, you can be real with others and find hope for your life. I'd like to end our time together today with a quick prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you and praise you for the miraculous work you have done in the lives of my friends and of myself. I thank you that I no longer have to suffer. I no longer have to be alone. That God, you have given us an opportunity to call you Father and call you friend. And God, I know there's those that have just watched this that are stirred, that are identifying with parts of these stories, that are hurting, that are broken, that need you to touch their life in a very real way right now, God. I pray that this wouldn't just be a story of somebody else, but God, there would be new stories that begin right now, this moment as we pray. That you would heal the broken hearts, that you would transform lives, that you would call people to yourself. Help them to respond. Help them to know how to respond. Help them to reach out and take your hand and begin a new life in you today, Lord. Pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.